Alright, who doesn't love the Pythagorean Theorem? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So Pythagorean Theorem works on any right triangle. You can find any missing side of a right triangle using Pythagorean Theorem. The only thing that you need to be careful about is what you plug in for c squared. C squared, your side c, has to be the hypotenuse, which is the longest side of any triangle. In this first example, the longest side is at 33 inches. If for some reason it's hard to tell looking at the picture, if it's not obvious what the longest side is, it will always be opposite of your 90 degrees. So that's always the hypotenuse. The A and the B, the other two sides, it doesn't really matter what you plug in as long as your side C is the hypotenuse. So when we do our Pythagorean theorem, we'll do a squared plus b squared. So we're going to use, these two sides for our a and our b. So here I'll use x for a. So a squared plus, now b squared, square root of 17 squared equals c squared. So then we're just going to go through and square everything. The x squared stays. Now the square root of 17 squared, this square cancels out the square root. Basically it just takes it right away, leaving us with just 17. And then 33 squared gives us 1089. So now we're trying to figure out what x is, so we'll keep solving. We'll subtract 17 from both sides. And we have x squared equals 1072. Now to undo x squared, the opposite of squaring is to square root both sides. And because we're talking about the side length of a triangle, usually when you square root an x squared in the equation you get two answers, but the negative answer doesn't make sense. We don't need the plus or minus, just the positive. Square root of 1072. So the thing that's going to be different doing Pythagorean theorem in this chapter is you can't use decimals. So you can't just grab your calculator, punch that in, and see what you get. What you want to do is see if 1072 will reduce. So you start dividing by 4, 9, 16, 25, blah, blah, all that. And 16 is the biggest number that fits in 67 times. So we'll go ahead and take the square root of 16 and we get 4, and that 67 stays as is. And then you don't want to forget labels because we are talking about a side length that's labeled in inches. We want to go ahead and throw our inches on this. So x is equal to 4 times the square root of 67. So that's how you would approach a problem if you're given the triangle. Make sure you're really aware of what you're plugging in for C. I just wanted to go through a quick one with kind of a word problem just to talk through that again. If you have a 36-inch television, how they measure TVs is they measure the diagonal. So if this is my TV, this diagonal is the measurement. So if it's a 36-inch television, that means that that is 36 inches. We also know that the television has a height of 20 inches, so here's my 20 inches over here. And the question is, what is the length? So this is the thing we don't know. Even though I start out with a rectangle, we can see we've got a right triangle right here, and we're missing a side, which means we can use Pythagorean theorem. When we use our Pythagorean theorem, just make sure you plug in the correct side for C. Hypotenuse across from the 90 degrees, that's what we're going to plug in for C. Between the other two, a squared and b squared shouldn't matter. So let's say I plug in a 20 for a, so 20 squared plus my b squared is just an x equals 36 squared. 20 squared, so now go through and just square everything. 20 squared is 400 plus x squared equals 1296. So we're working on solving for x. Go ahead and subtract 400 from both sides. So you have x squared equals 896. Then you're going to square root both sides. That's how we undo the x squared. and you have the square root of 896. Now we don't want the decimal, we want to just see if we can reduce the radical. So you just start dividing. Do you have any perfect square numbers that fit in? You want to find the biggest one that fits in. 64 fits in 14 times. So what we'll do is we'll take the square root of 64 and get 8, and that square root of 14 stays the same. And then what kind of label might this get? Look at the problem, we can see it's in inches, so inches. So the length of the TV is 8 square roots of 14 inches.